Hi, I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Around, and I'm here to talk about Superman again. I know I already did a spoiler free review of the new James Gunn Superman movie here on the channel. I also was just part of a spoiler kind of panel podcast review with a couple other people on a different channel, Average Superstar TV. I'll put a link to both of those in the description if you want to check those out. But today, I'm doing a video that I knew from the moment James Gunn announced he was doing a Superman movie, I was going to be doing this video, and that is Zack Snyder's Man of Steel versus James Gunn's Superman. I thought long and hard about including the 1978 Richard Donner movie with Christopher Reeve in this lineup and kind of doing like a triple, 1978 versus 2013 versus 2025. What's the best version of Superman? I even thought about including Superman Returns, just to kind of throw that in there. In the end, I decided to just focus on these two because the conflict seems to be between these two versions. And I think most of us, at least, myself and those older than me, can agree that Superman 1978 is impossible to top. And I can agree, and most of us can agree, that Christopher Reeve just embodied everything that was Superman. He is the GOAT, as the youngins say today. So this isn't really about what's the best Superman movie or the best, iteration of Superman. It's what's the second best one to 1978 Superman, a movie that, again, I don't think you're ever going to top. So I just want to put that there, acknowledge that, and explain that that's why this is between these two. Because let's face it, Zack Snyder and James Gunn, they can be polarizing, and their fans even more so. Now, let me be very clear. There is no beef between the two of these men. They just guest starred in an episode of Rick and Morty together where they poke fun at themselves. People forget James Gunn wrote the Dawn of the Dead remake that Zack Snyder directed in 2004. These are not filmmakers that have any beef with each other. Despite their fans, especially you Snyder bros, I'm looking at you. You know who you are. I get that you like a movie. I get being passionate. But some of these guys are nuts. Okay? I know you got mad when, James Gunn made fun of you with the monkeys typing on the computers, but that was a funny joke. And if you could laugh at yourselves, you would laugh at it. And if you're, whatever. I'm here today to compare these two movies. Now, for those of you who are saying, oh, well, it's an obvious one or the no, I wanted to kind of go through category by category and look at in detail, what does each version do well, what could each version do better, and which version does what better than the other. I try to be as objective as possible. I'm not going into this automatically saying that one is garbage and the other is not, because anyone who tells you that a movie is just garbage is not a very good person to listen to about critical thinking if that's their only takeaway. So, uh, this is how it's going to work. And I've done a few of these on the channel before. We're going to go through 5 different rounds, 5 different categories. I'm going to award a winner for each category, after discussing it. And then in the end, we will have a final winner. I've done this for the Wolfman. I've done this for the different versions of Nosferatu. And now I'm doing it for Superman. So without further ado, let's get started. Round 1. Characters. Can I just point out that both versions have one of Superman's dads making a decision that I really don't like? Whether it's Kevin Costner saying, "No, son, let the tornado kill me," or Bradley Cooper saying, "Go to Earth to conquer it and spread your seed and enslave the human race." I'm not a fan of either of those creative decisions. And it interests me that as much as people took issue with, Zack Snyder doing that in Man of Steel, a lot of people are taking issue with the new one. And I was waiting for it to be revealed that Lex Luthor had actually altered the message and was lying, and that wasn't what his parents actually wanted him to do. And I was shocked when it actually was. But more on that later. When it comes to character, let's just get this out of the way. Henry Cavill has the look, and I think he has the better suit. And I feel icky and sacrilegious saying that because normally I hate CGI. I know his cape is CGI, but it looks really good. It's good CGI. And I just think Cavill had, if we're just going by visual, Cavill looks more like Superman, I think, than maybe Christopher Reeve. He has the look, but because it was Nolan, because it was David Gore, and because they were, hot off of the Dark Knight trilogy, they made him too much like Batman. They made Clark Kent that tortured soul who's, wandering the earth struggling to find his purpose. But that's Batman Begins. And here's the thing. That worked perfectly for Batman. I don't think it works for Superman. And I think it was a misstep. And I think Cavill plays it really well. He's doing the best he can with what he's being given. But I don't think that's as interesting a way to play it. Whereas David Cornsweet, his version of Superman, I love how human he feels. He gets angry. He makes mistakes. He's even a little, dare I say, arrogant at times. He's very Gryffindor, for those of you who get that reference. But I like that he feels more. He's relatable, and I know that one of the biggest criticisms of Superman, people say, "Oh, you can't do Superman in the modern day. He's not very relatable. He's too powerful." James Gunn's Superman feels relatable. And I think that's something that Snyder never Snyder's Superman is like a god, but Gunn's is relatable. And I think that makes him a more interesting protagonist, and I think that makes his character arc all the more, fun to watch. Now, if we're talking villains, I love Michael Shannon as Zod. I know he's over the top. I know he's cheesy, but he kind of fits the role perfectly, and I have fun with it. Yes, there's times it's hard to take him seriously because of how over the top he gets. But if I'm being honest, he doesn't hold a candle to Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor, who might actually be the best Lex Luthor, maybe even more so than Gene Hackman. Just this tech bro billionaire guy that just hates Superman to his core, and just the level of arrogance to him and the level of like, I'm going to use the US government to my advantage. We live in a world where supervillains like him really exist, and without ever having to name them or be too on the nose with who he's trying to emulate, you kind of tell who Nicholas Holt was aiming for and who he was kind of, you know, not quite satirizing, but channeling as his corrupt billionaire Lex Luthor. Lois Lane, on the other hand, I actually like the Man of Steel version better, and I'll tell you why. Snyder gives her more to do. She's a much more active participant in the story. And I love Amy Adams. She's ballsy, she's bold. She's willing to, go there for a story and go there to do the right thing. I like Rachel Brosnahan a lot. I wasn't crazy about her chemistry with David Cornsweet, but I feel like if you took her out of the movie, not much changes. Whereas Amy Adams' Lois Lane very much drives the plot in the beginning when she's researching, who Superman is, and is sort of like that bridge. She's the one who, helps lead him to, his Fortress of Solitude. So I really like her in that, and I think that's probably the one character that Snyder did better. As for all the other supporting characters, everyone else in Man of Steel has a really, really great cast. I love Russell Crowe. He's the other one I think Snyder did better, only because I don't like what James Gunn did with him. Love Russell Crowe's Jor-El. I would watch a whole movie just set on that Krypton prologue. When it comes to the Kents, though, I love how real James Gunn's, Ma and Pa Kent are. They're not played by big celebrities, and they just feel like real, genuine people, real, genuine parents that are just there to give Superman advice and are just there to help their son out. It's beautiful. It's touching. And then, of course, you have the Justice Gang, who I was worried were going to overtake the movie, but they're used just enough as supporting roles to kind of elevate everything up. So I think round one is a pretty easy round to cede to James Gunn. I think his version does it better. There's only, two supporting characters that I thought Snyder did better, but everyone else by far, I think James Gunn understands this character better than Snyder does, and it really shows. Round two, story. Let's get this out of the way up front. The creative decision to make Jonathan Kent let himself die in the tornado so that his son wouldn't be revealed, even though his son can move so fast nobody would have even seen him, was a dumb move. That's not necessarily Snyder's fault. It might be Goyer or Nolan's fault with the script, but Snyder signed off on it and agreed to shoot the scene that way. So, well, I guess if the director has final say, it is kind of his fault. That being said, I don't take issue with Superman killing Zod at the end, and here's why. He was reluctant to do it. He didn't want to do it. He had to do it, and he is broken that he had to do it. I do take issue with Superman in Man of Steel completely destroying the city with Zod by throwing him into buildings, knocking them down, and creating how many 9/11s by destroying how many buildings with how many innocent civilians in them. So Man of Steel makes some very interesting, bold choices. In theory, I love the idea of a Superman movie being like a first contact story. I know that was Nolan and Goyer's plan, that the arrival of Superman is the single most important event in the history of the world. It's a very Nolan idea. Very, in line with like Oppenheimer, and Interstellar and all that. But I think it gets lost in its missteps, and in that, not that the not that it's bad to take risks, but sometimes they don't pay off, and some of those creative choices I just can't justify or get behind. But I think it tried to do something different. I give it credit for trying that, but it makes baffling choices that I can't even begin to defend. James Gunn's Superman, on the other hand, oddly feels much less epic. It almost feels like we're jumping in the middle of an episode of the animated show, and this is just like one random one off adventure that he's in. So as a result, the story has less stakes to it. Well, till we get to the black hole thing at the end. But I think overall it's more cohesive and makes more sense within its own logic and reason. And while it doesn't take the same bold risks that Man of Steel does in its creative choices and in its storyline choices, it serves them up better. It cooks the standard dish, but it cooks that dish very, very well. Man of Steel goes for the weird dish and it screws it up really badly. So I think I have to give round two also to James Gunn's Superman. Round three, technical achievements. This is where Man of Steel really, really shines. Because again, as much as I enjoy James Gunn's Superman, I have to admit and agree with some of the critics, some of the Snyder fanboys. Don't get all offended, but I know a lot of them said, "Oh, it looks like a CW show." Just the way that it's shot, it looks less cinematic. Kinda, yeah, I can see that. Look, Snyder has issues with story, and we'll look at all of his movies, and you see that when he's left to his own devices, things kind of go weird. But the one thing I can consistently say about Zack Snyder, the man is an amazing cinematographer. He knows his way around, the lens, and not just Man of Steel, but many of his movies, every shot looks like a gorgeous, beautiful painting. And Man of Steel is no different. It is beautifully shot. It looks every single shot looks epic. Even the prologue with Krypton at the beginning, there's so much world building without saying a word. We just see it all. There's such a visual style and language to it that Gunn, I don't think, comes close to. He's not trying to go for that, but it's the area that Snyder absolutely dominates in. Yes, they both rely heavily on CGI, but it looks better in Man of Steel. Now, to be fair, James Gunn's Superman, like I said, it's going for that more kind of cartoonish comic booky look where it's not meant to be the real world. Man of Steel is. But the fact that Man of Steel pulls it off and looks that good despite being set in the real world where we're going to hold it under much greater scrutiny, I think is an achievement worth acknowledging. And then we come to what is probably my biggest issue with James Gunn's Superman movie. And I didn't know where else to put this other than like the technical achievements, because it's part of like, visual sound and all that stuff, but the musical score. Now, don't get me wrong, when I first heard that electric guitar version of John Williams' Superman theme in the teaser, yes, it sent chills down my spine. Yes, it nearly brought tears to my eyes. It's absolutely beautiful. John Williams' score is the quintessential, superhero theme. He's one of, if not the greatest living movie composers, in history. And it's such an iconic piece of music. So I understand James Gunn wanting to use it, not just in the trailer, but in this movie. And it's used very well in the movie. Just those few notes that I dare not even hum or incur the wrath of YouTube copyright claims, but you know the tune. The one thing I wish it did, though, is you can use the John Williams theme, but I wish that James Gunn's Superman had his own theme in addition to that, that we can still hear those John Williams notes, but give this Superman his own auditory musical identity. I think musical themes play such an important role in movies, and it's the one thing that this Superman, I think, is missing. Now, I am not here to say that Hans Zimmer's Ideal of Hope for Man of Steel is better than John Williams' Superman score. That is a personal opinion. You can like one better than the other. I'm not telling you which one to like better than the other. But I will say it's also an amazing piece of music. It's at least in the same ballpark as the John Williams one, and it gives Zack Snyder's Superman an identity that you hear those tunes, which again I dare not even hum or incur the wrath of YouTube copyright claims. You hear those notes, and you picture Henry Cavill. And I feel like it's such a thing that James Gunn's Superman is missing. And it's probably my biggest issue with the movie is its absence. That 10, 15, 20 years from now, when we're looking back on Superman movies, it's going to be a big gap that this movie is missing. So that is why, for this round at least, I got to give it to Man of Steel. Round 4, style and tone. This is probably the hardest category to not only discuss, but to kind of, pick a side for, because both have great style and tone. Both have the signature of their director all over it, but they are so vastly different. But their objectives are vastly different. Man of Steel is meant to be a first contact story set in the real world. And I think it works at that. Yes, it's extremely gritty. Yes, its color palette is more muted than it should be. I know. But I really like how, again, Zack Snyder, if there's one thing I can say other than, his visuals look great, he's really good at crafting individual scenes that I'm like, that's an amazing scene that in a vacuum is perfect and individually is better than any one individual scene from James Gunn. So, for example, the opening prologue in Krypton is amazing. And in a vacuum, I like that scene better than any one scene in a vacuum from James Gunn's Superman. Superman's first flight in Man of Steel, where you hear that Ideal of Hope playing, and he realizes he can fly, and you see him smile for like the one time in the movie as he takes off through the sky like a jet engine. Again, I like that individual scene more than any one individual scene from James Gunn's Superman. But if we're talking the overall movie as like a whole, that's where James Gunn wins out, in that it's more tonally consistent and its silent tone makes more sense for what it is. It's not the real world. It's a cartoonish comic book world, and it's not afraid to be that. And it just oozes that out of every single orifice. There are references and name drops to comic book things that even I had to go home and look up, and I'm a DC nerd. It's oozing with all that, and you can tell that it is Superman through and through. Whereas I think Man of Steel feels more like a Zack Snyder movie with Superman in it. James Gunn's Superman movie feels like this is Superman. This is the you know the quintessential, that this is the opposite of antithesis. This is the thesis. This is the basic representation of what Superman is. So because of that, again, I got to give round 4 to James Gunn's Superman. Round 5, ideas and themes. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Dave, James Gunn won 3, Zack Snyder won 1. It's impossible for Man of Steel to win this. Why are you even still talking? Just award it to James Gunn. I'm going to. Yes, that's who's going to win, but I still want to talk about this a little bit because there is one issue. I know I talked about the musical theme as a big issue. There's another issue I had with James Gunn's Superman that I have to address before I'm still going to let it win. Not let it win. It won on its own. Don't come at me, Snyder Bros. But it's still, I still have to address it. We go through the motions of Superman has intervened with one country invading another country, and there's this, geopolitical discourse about should Superman act in the state level interventions, as is he a representative of himself? Is he a representative of the US government, the US nation? What are the ethics and legal ramifications of him doing that? But in the end, spoilers, Lex Luthor was behind it all, so he has to intervene, and it kind of lets him off the hook from having to make that difficult choice. Now, again, I said James Gunn's Superman, its theme is very much what does it mean to be human, and how will Superman accept his role? Is he going to be what his parents want him to be, or is he going to be what he is now on Earth? Obviously, he accepts the latter, but I feel like it was a convenient plot device so that he could avoid having to make a hard decision. And that's one area that, again, I think Snyder did a lot better, but I can't give him credit for in this video because the whole Gods Among Us sequence where you see all the different, pundits and even Neil deGrasse Tyson himself talking about the geopolitical, ethical, scientific, philosophical ramifications of Superman, that's in Batman v Superman. That's not a Man of Steel, and this video is about Man of Steel. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I think Snyder did that better in a different movie, which is not being considered here in this video. I think Man of Steel's themes are solid. Again, it's about, they're both ultimately about, are you what you were born to be, or are you what you can be? Krypton was a planet that everyone's purpose and job was decided before they were even born. Zod's purpose was to be the general. Jor-El's purpose was to be the scientist. But he wanted Kal-El to be more than that. Exact opposite of what Bradley Cooper's Jor-El wanted his Kal-El to do. But it's interesting that both movies explore that theme of it is our choices that make us who we are, not necessarily what we were set up to be, and that is what makes us human. And since I'm feeling generous, since I know James Gunn is going to win anyway, I'm going to leave this round a tie. James Gunn still wins because let's face it, it is the better Superman movie. But I don't want to get into that pitfall of well, Man of Steel is just garbage and no, Man of Steel does certain things better than James Gunn's Superman. But if we're talking the overall movie, if we're taking into account all of these categories, all of these details, all of these kind of components and pieces, yes, James Gunn's Superman is the better Superman. But it's still second to Richard Donner's 1978 classic. But hey, these are just my thoughts. This is just my comparison. This is just my video. Get your own channel if you want to do one. I'm just kidding. Don't. Watch mine. Let me know in the comments, what did you think? Snyder Bros, I hope I didn't upset you too much. I say that all in good fun. I do genuinely love, I really like the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman. I do genuinely like the Snyder cut of Justice League. I just think that this movie is better than Man of Steel. So, I enjoy both. Please let me know in the comments, what do you agree with, disagree with, come at me. It's what YouTube is for. Like, share, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. If you don't, you may end up trapped on a school bus where young Clark Kent has the option to save you, but he might not because his dad tells him maybe he shouldn't. And as always, every day is Halloween.